Good to be with you all. Grateful to be back, and I'm I've got new glasses, and what's interesting about them is they help me see far away, but they make my reading vision worse. So I can read just fine without them, but when I put them on, I can't read. So we'll see. So now you're mostly a blur, but thank you. It's good to see you all, sort of. So here we go. Well, let's hope we get through this, right? Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, then why, oh, why can't I? There's a beautiful quote, powerful quote from Václav Havel, who's the Transylvanian. I got that ring. I'm wondering if we can. I don't want to have you all be bothered by that ring. Maybe turn the volume just down a notch. Oh, really? I hear it. Okay, yeah, I hear it too. We all need this is interesting. Okay. Well, I'm glad you don't hear it except for Nick. But so we'll get but Václav Havel was the president of the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, and the Czech Republic as it shifted over, and he was also a political prisoner prior to that time as the Soviet Union collapsed. And he writes this. He says, "The kind of hope I often think about, especially in situations that are particularly hopeless, such as prison, I understand above all as a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed." There was a fairly awful science experiment done by an American psychologist, Martin Seligman, in the 1960s, and I'm hesitant to even share it with you because it's not great, but I think it unfortunately tells us something really important. So if you'll bear with me as we go through a little bit of this, the hardships of this experiment. Basically, Seligman set up these experiments where dogs were given electric shocks. It's awful. For some of these dogs, they had a way to stop or escape the shocks. They had a button they could press, or they had a place they could go, and they would be out of way of the shocks. So they could hit that off button, or they could move to that safe area and protect themselves from the shocks. While for other dogs, they didn't have this button, or they didn't have this safe area so they didn't have a way to stop the shocks. And Seligman learned that the dogs who could stop or escape the shocks, they responded the way that we'd expect. They turned the shocks off, or they went to the safe area. They took care of themselves. They protected themselves. They did what you would think they would do. But for the dogs with no way out, they eventually gave up searching for a way out, and they actually laid down eventually and began to passively accept the shocks with a whimper. he found that even when a way out was introduced later, those dogs who had experienced no way out continued to view their awful fate as inevitable. They didn't seek that safe way out any longer. Again, it's a terrible experiment, but I do think it has an important teaching, because I think human beings are like this too, that we are like this too. When life beats us down over and over again, especially when we are young, we begin to accept that as the way of life. We begin to accept that harshness as the way to life. We come to view life as an inevitable hardship that has no escape. And this is one of the reasons it shows up in many different ways, but this is one of the reasons generational poverty is so hard to tackle and escape from. Seligman calls this learned helplessness, but I also like to think of it as learned hopelessness. At the root is a painfully instilled belief based on our past experiences that life does not get better. While not all of us with such experiences succumb to this learned hopelessness, millions of people do. And probably all of us have at least some of it in some way or some place in how we approach the world. For those of us who haven't had that level of persistent trauma from such an early age, I think it can be difficult for us when we see someone who has, to really understand their experience. We see the possibilities in our own lives. We see the opportunities, and sometimes we can't understand why others don't see the opportunities or possibilities in theirs. This shows up in political rhetoric all the time about people in poverty and in other circumstances. And we can become frustrated. We can become even judgmental, and in some cases even hostile or hateful. Why aren't you, taking the chances that are being given to you? Simply because we don't understand why our experience might be different from someone else's experience. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes the way we see the world, the way we experience the world is different than someone else experiences it. And it's important for us to always remember that the way that the way that we have a view or experience of the world is not necessarily the way that somebody else experiences the world. We have a phrase that we use in our work with my agency, my nonprofit agency, which is called "Fight Poverty, Not the Poor," which means we try to fight the conditions that create trauma, not those who have experienced it. We don't create blame or judgment on the people who are experiencing poverty, but rather try to work on the conditions that have led to their challenges. And one of my favorite quotes of all times comes from a Jesuit priest. His name's Father Gregory Boyle. And Father Boyle is a pretty amazing person. If you ever get a chance to hear him speak, he's quite remarkable. He was actually in Indianapolis a few years ago for the Faith in Action conference here in town. Some of you may have been at that, but he works in LA, and he particularly works with gang members. They are finding possibility in their lives through employment. And his organization, which is called Homeboy Industries, has a bakery and a restaurant and a screen printing business and more, all with the intent of supporting people from troubled circumstances find a better life, helping them see possibility in their lives. He says, "Here is what we seek: a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it." I love that phrase. Here is what we seek: a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. I met a man named Coy several years ago. Actually, it's probably like a decade ago. And Coy fit into this category of experience that we call chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness means basically you've been homeless for a long time, and you're homeless because you have disabilities. Many chronic homeless people struggle mightily, and with something we call trimorbidity, where they have a severe substance use disorder, they have severe mental illness, and they have a chronic illness or physical disability. They have all three, and we call that trimorbidity, and it's particularly dangerous and particularly deadly, with the average age of death for a chronically homeless person being 47 years old. So it's just pretty startling. Those who are chronically homeless are the people we often see. They're they tend to be the more visible side of homelessness. There's transitional homelessness, temporary homelessness that we see far less of, but the people who are chronically homeless, we tend to see more commonly, whether it be on the street corners asking for change, or sleeping on a sidewalk, or unfortunately sometimes interacting with the police, usually for being somewhere someone else doesn't want them to be. Now, Coy had been homeless for over a decade. He struggled with severe depression and alcoholism, and he also lived with Crohn's disease. And so he had all three. He had trimorbidity. And due to the Crohn's disease, Coy had a colostomy, living with a stoma in his abdomen. And I hope you'll forgive the directness of this story, but it's important to hear some of the details here. Coy didn't have any medical supplies while living on the street. He just made do. So in order to get by, he would use Kroger bags as for colostomy bags for his colostomy. So some days it would actually get so cold that the bags would freeze to his body. He, over time, developed a permanent wound around the stoma that became infected. And it was so awful that his nickname became Stinky, which he accepted with some humor. But the scent was so strong that it was hard to be in the same room as he was. That was the severity of the wound that he was living with. And he spent, most of his life outdoors as a response to that. Coy was a very sweet man, but he was resistant to care. He was resistant to help. Our street outreach team would work with him, trying to get him support and housing and health care, but he would just turn away from the help. Again, not in any way that was rude, but just kind of avoiding it, not showing up for appointments, or doing other things, which all kind of prevented progress for himself. And it feels a little too belittling of the effort to say, but it took over 2 years, and we jump right to this, but it took over 2 years of working with him regularly to convince him to move into a home that we had for him. Just a very lengthy process and time of trying to build trust, build relationship, build connections, to the point where he actually began to trust us enough to receive a resource that we had for him. And when he moved in, we immediately connected him with medical support. That was one of the very first things we did, which provided him with the necessary supplies to take care of his stoma. We noticed, though, that he wasn't using them. We gave him those supplies, but he wasn't using them. And we learned that he was saving them for a time when he might need them. So instead of using them now, he was saving them, thinking there would be a time in the future that would be more important for him to use them. So we just overloaded him with supplies, more than 3 times the normal amount. And that began to help him feel secure enough to start to use them, to have that big supply. It helped him feel more secure. And we also helped him get to a wound care doctor to address his permanent wound that he had. And amazingly, he began to heal. That wound began to heal. The odor faded, although he kept the nickname. And his wound began to repair. He began to get better. And about 6 months in, after his move into his home and the care began, he was at the doctor with one of our caseworkers, and having gotten much better. And he said something truly remarkable. It's a phrase I'll never forget. He said, I didn't think I could get better. I didn't think I could get better. And when I heard these words, when it was relayed to me later by the caseworker, they just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I knew what that meant for him. I knew what that phrase meant for him, and it meant more than one thing. It meant two things. And one was the truth about his experience, which was that he didn't think he could get better. He believed that his life was awful and always would be awful, that like that wound, his state of struggle was permanent and nothing could change that. And so when you think about that, no wonder he resisted our outreach for so long. No wonder he resisted care. No wonder he didn't pursue a different life for himself. He didn't believe that life could get better. And why try if there's no possibility, if there is no hope, if this is my life, why even put in an effort? But these words of his had a double meaning. I didn't think I could get better was also a statement of awe, because he was getting better. For so long, he saw his life without possibility, without hope. And here for him in this moment was hope. His life not only could get better, but was better. Coy successfully lived out the rest of his life with renewed health and a safe home until death took him, as it comes for all of us. He lived out his remaining years knowing that goodness was not only possible, but was present for him. There's a beautiful quote from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. If you'll excuse my nerdiness a little bit here, but in it, Samwise Gamgee is speaking to Frodo Baggins. Come on, you all watch the movies. So, it was a particular time in their efforts to overcome great evil. And Sam says, it's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folks in these stories had lots of chances of turning back. Only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something, that there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. They were holding on to something, that there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. Václav Havel, who again, he was a political prisoner many times in his life before he became the first president of the Czech Republic. Following the fall of the state of the Soviet Union, he said this, he said, "The kind of hope I often think about, especially in situations that are particularly hopeless, such as prison, I understand above all as a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit in a powerful Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. I love those two quotes, so how they're similar, how there's this appreciation that hope is built in the good, and knowing that it's there, that it's in our bones. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. Hope is an orientation of the spirit, is an orientation of the heart, is an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. There is a certain kind of hope that is not built on outcomes. It's not built on a future that may or may not be. It's built in a belief in the goodness within each of us. I understand why we view hope as the chance that something good will happen. Sometimes that we see it that way, that we, look for this possibility that might make the now better. But that also can leave us empty and constantly focusing on something in the future, and perhaps leave us not moving anywhere when that chance seems impossible. In Seligman's experiments with the dogs, in order to get a dog to move to a safe place who had learned helplessness or hopelessness, they had to physically help the dog move its legs to the new place. That they would grab the dog and walk the dog to the safe place. And they had to do that a few times. They had to take them there to get them to believe. They had to show them the good. They had to present to them the good so that they could see it and feel it and know it in their own bones again. For Coy, it took the same thing. Years of outreach workers standing for the good in his life and his eventual risk to grasp for it. We have to remember that too, that Coy was the ultimate decider of his own life, and in the end, he chose hope. Despite all that he had been through, he chose hope. And that, I believe, is what we are called to. I don't know for sure. None of us do, but it certainly feels like we're in dangerous times when hate and division are high. I have very sane people saying they're afraid of what might be happen to our country and where it might be going, and even talking about, things that seemed even 10 years ago to be absolutely off the charts in terms of unlikely. And so, recognizing that we are in these what feel like at least dangerous times, I think that many of us feel. It feels to me like we need to build a hope not on the premise that success is guaranteed, that goodness is going to follow in the future, but a hope built on the absolute knowing that there is some good in the world and it's worth fighting for. Hope as an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart, an ability to work for something not because it stands a chance to succeed, but because it is good. That's the hope that lives inside and which no one can take away. Shalom, amen, and blessed be.